Welcome to this deep dive into one of the most iconic and influential survival horror games ever made, Silent Hill 2. Released in 2001 by Konami, this masterpiece from Team Silent redefined what horror games should be, shifting the genre's focus from jump scares and combat to a haunting exploration of the human psyche. Silent Hill 2 is a journey into guilt, trauma, and the darkest recesses of the mind, told through the eyes of James Sunderland as he ventures into the fog-drenched town of Silent Hill to uncover the truth behind a mysterious letter from his deceased wife. So, grab your flashlight and prepare to enter the fog. This is Silent Hill 2. Let's dive in. At the heart of Silent Hill 2 lies the journey of James Sunderland, a man burdened by the weight of a tragic past. James's story begins with a letter from his wife, Mary, inviting him to meet her in the special place, the town of Silent Hill. The problem, however, is that Mary has been dead for 3 years. Despite this impossibility, James clings to the hope that Mary might somehow still be alive, leading him to the fog-shrouded town that becomes a reflection of his internal torment. From the moment James arrives in Silent Hill, he is drawn deeper into a nightmarish world where reality and hallucination blur. His journey through key locations like Brookhaven Hospital, Toluca Prison, and Lakeview Hotel becomes increasingly symbolic, with each environment reflecting his fractured psyche. As he progresses, James encounters various characters who seem trapped in their own cycles of guilt and trauma. Figures like Angela Orozco, Eddie Dombrowski, and Maria, each representing different facets of human suffering. James's quest is framed by a desire for closure, but the true mystery at the heart of Silent Hill 2 is not simply Mary's fate, it is James's relationship with his own guilt. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that James is not just searching for Mary, he is also searching for answers within himself, even as he struggles to suppress memories of his role in her death.
The letter from Mary functions as the game's central narrative device, but its significance evolves as the story progresses. Initially, it seems like a hopeful, albeit strange beacon, a possible sign that Mary might still be alive. However, the letter is quickly revealed to be a part of James's delusion, a manifestation of his denial and guilt. The letter, much like the town of Silent Hill itself, serves as a reflection of James's psychological state. It is both a literal and symbolic call, urging him to confront the truth he has buried. James's quest to find Mary is deeply intertwined with his desire to resolve the emotional conflict stemming from her death. As the game progresses, it becomes increasingly clear that James is repressing a painful truth: Mary's death was not natural. In a moment of emotional and psychological despair, James euthanized his terminally ill wife, unable to cope with her suffering and the toll it took on him. This revelation shatters the narrative James has constructed for himself, forcing both him and the player to confront the devastating weight of his guilt. Mary's letter, which initially seems like a message of hope, ultimately represents James's need for closure. The letter is not just a plot device, but a symbol of James's internal struggle, his denial, guilt, and need for absolution. As the layers of the stories are peeled back, the central mystery shifts from whether Mary is alive to whether James can ever forgive himself for his actions.
James Sunderland is one of the most complex and psychologically rich protagonists in video game history. His motivations are shrouded in mystery for much of the game, with players initially perceiving him as a man simply searching for his lost wife. However, as the game progresses, it becomes clear that James' journey is not just one of physical searching, it's a journey of psychological reckoning. His primary motivation is rooted in guilt, denial, and the desire for redemption. James is a deeply flawed character, one who has committed an unforgivable act in the name of love. His decision to euthanize Mary was driven by a combination of compassion and selfishness. While he wanted to end her suffering, he was also unable to cope with the burden of caring for her as her illness progressed. This duality, compassion mixed with selfishness, forms the crux of James's internal struggle. Throughout the game, James wavers between denial and acceptance, with Silent Hill acting as a twisted therapy session. James's interactions with other characters in Silent Hill are often reflections of his internal conflicts. His journey is deeply introspective, with horrors he faces in the town acting as manifestations of his guilt, shame, and repressed memories. He is not a traditional hero, but rather a deeply flawed man, seeking redemption, making his journey all the more compelling and tragic.
The character of Mary and Maria serve as dual representations of James's conflicting emotions, guilt and desire. Mary, his deceased wife, symbolizing James's guilt and sorrow, her prolonged illness and death haunt him throughout the game, and his inability to cope with her suffering is the catalyst for his descent into Silent Hill. Mary represents James's need for forgiveness and his desire to atone for the crimes of killing her, even as he struggles to remember the details of that event. Maria, on the other hand, is a seductive, idealized version of Mary. She embodies James's repressed sexual desires and his longing for a version of Mary who is healthy, vibrant, and unburdened by illness. Maria's appearance in Silent Hill is a cruel illusion. She's not real, yet James clings to her as a way of avoiding the painful reality of his guilt. Maria's constant deaths and resurrections throughout the game serve to remind James of his inability to truly escape his guilt or deny what he has done. The relationship between Mary and Maria highlights the game's theme of duality. Mary is the real, flawed woman whom James failed, while Maria is the unattainable fantasy that represents his desire to escape his guilt. Together, they form a tragic portrait of James's inner conflict, his longing for redemption and his inability to let go of his selfish desires.
Angela Roxo is perhaps the most tragic character in Silent Hill 2. Her story is one of abuse and trauma. Having been sexually assaulted by her father, Angela's journey in Silent Hill mirrors James's in many ways, as she too is grappling with intense guilt and unresolved trauma. However, Angela's trauma is more externalized. She is consumed by her anger and despair, unable to move beyond the pain of her past. Silent Hill reflects this trauma back at her, with the environments she inhabits often taking on grotesque forms that symbolize her abuse. Angela's arc is ultimately one of hopelessness. Unlike James, who is offered the chance for redemption, Angela sees no way out of her torment. Her final scene, where she ascends a burning staircase and remarks that "it's always like this for me," is a powerful and devastating moment that underscores the theme of inescapable suffering. Angela's story is a reflection of how trauma can consume a person, leaving them trapped in a cycle of pain and self-destruction.
Eddie Dombrowski is another character whose experiences in Silent Hill serve as a reflection of his internal struggles. Unlike James, who represses his guilt, Eddie externalizes his feelings of alienation and violence. Bullied and ostracized throughout his life, Eddie lashes out in the world, killing those he believes have wronged him. Silent Hill amplifies Eddie's violent tendencies, pushing him further into madness and isolation. Eddie's descent into violence is a cautionary tale for James, showing him what can happen when guilt and anger are left unchecked. Eddie represents a darker path, one where a person succumbs fully to their inner demons and loses any chance for redemption. His tragic end serves as a reminder of the thin line between guilt and violence, and how easily one can lead to the other.
Laura is the youngest character in the game, and her innocence stands in stark contrast to the guilt-ridden adults around her. Unlike James, Angela, and Eddie, Laura has no personal demons to confront in Silent Hill. She does not see the monsters or the horrors that the others face, suggesting that she is untouched by the town's psychological influence. Laura serves as a moral compass for James, reminding him of his better nature and the innocence he has lost. Her relationship with Mary, whom she knew during her illness, further complicates James's feelings of guilt. Laura's presence forces James to confront the fact that, while he was consumed by his own suffering, there were others who loved and cared for Mary in ways he could not.
Silent Hill is not just a physical place, it is a manifestation of the psychological and emotional states of the characters who enter it. For James, the fog that covers the town symbolizes the obscurity of James's memories and the repression of his guilt. The deeper he goes into the town, the more nightmarish it becomes, mirroring his descent into his own psyche. The town's ability to shape itself according to the mental states of its visitors is one of the game's most compelling aspects. Each character sees a different version of Silent Hill, with the town reflecting their personal demons back at them. For James, this means confronting the truth about Mary's death and his role in it, while for characters like Angela and Eddie, the town becomes a space where their own traumas and violent tendencies are magnified.
The transition between Silent Hill's foggy streets and the nightmarish Otherworld is a central mechanic in the game, marking key points in the narrative. The Otherworld is a distorted, more terrifying version of the town, filled with grotesque creatures and environments that reflect the psychological torment of its inhabitants. For James, the Otherworld represents his deeper layers of guilt and denial. Each time James enters the Otherworld, the environment becomes more hostile and surreal, reflecting his growing awareness of his guilt. The use of the Otherworld as a narrative device allows the game to explore different aspects of James's psyche, with each shift in environment symbolizing his progression towards the truth.
Silent Hill 2 uses environmental storytelling to great effect, with each location serving as a symbol of James's inner turmoil. Brookhaven Hospital is one of the game's most significant locations, symbolizing sickness, death, and suffering. It is closely tied to James's memory of Mary's illness and his inability to care for her. The hospital's oppressive atmosphere and the monsters that inhabit it reflect James's fear of illness and his guilt over Mary's death. The Toluca prison is another key location, representing punishment and guilt. The prison's labyrinth design and the hostile creatures that inhabit it symbolizes James's feelings of entrapment by his guilt. The prison is also a metaphor for James's internalized need for punishment, with Pyramid Head acting as the executioner. The omnipresent fog in Silent Hill represents uncertainty and repression. It obscures the town and the truth, mirroring James's own inability to see clearly. The fog creates a sense of disorientation and unease, reflecting James's fragmented memories. The creatures in Silent Hill 2 are more than just enemies. They are manifestations of James's internal conflicts. The most iconic of these is Pyramid Head, a symbol of James's guilt and desire for punishment. Other monsters such as the lying figures and the nurses represents James's fear of illness and his sexual frustrations.
Guilt is the driving force behind James's journey in Silent Hill 2. His guilt over Mary's death is what draws him to Silent Hill, and it is his quest for redemption that propels him forward. The game explores the nature of guilt and the lengths to which people will go to avoid confronting it. James's actions are driven by his need for forgiveness, both from Mary and from himself. His journey through Silent Hill is a quest for redemption, but whether or not he finds it depends on the player's choices.
Silent Hill 2 is a game about memory, specifically the ways in which people repress and distort their memories to protect them from painful truths. James's memory of Mary's death is fragmented and unreliable, with key details obscured by his denial. As the game progresses, these repressed memories come to the surface, forcing James to confront the truth about what he has done. Silent Hill itself can be seen as a manifestation of repressed memories, with the town serving as a space where characters are forced to confront the truth they have tried to forget. The game's narrative structure, with its gradual reveal of James's role in Mary's death, mirrors the psychological process of uncovering repressed trauma. Silent Hill 2's gameplay mechanics revolve around three core elements: combat, exploration, and puzzle solving, all designed to enhance the psychological horror narrative. Unlike many contemporary survival horror games that prioritizes action, the combat system is deliberately simplistic. James Sunderland, the protagonist, is an ordinary man with no specialized combat training. His awkwardness in handling weapons, whether melee like planks and pipes or firearms like handguns and shotguns, serves to highlight his vulnerability and heighten the player's sense of dread. The clumsy combat mechanics amplify the feeling of helplessness as the player struggles to fight off grotesque enemies that embody James's inner turmoil. Exploration plays a central role in the gameplay. The town of Silent Hill is shrouded in a thick fog, creating a constant sense of disorientation. Players must navigate the town's labyrinth streets, desolate interiors, and cryptic landmarks, searching for clues that unravel the mystery of Mary's letter. Exploration is often punctuated by moments of psychological tension, as players stumble upon disturbing imagery and cryptic environmental storytelling. Puzzles are an integral part of Silent Hill 2, acting as more than just obstacles. They are deeply tied to the narrative, often reflecting James's psychological state. For example, many puzzles require the player to interrupt disturbing poems or manipulate symbols that mirror the game's themes of guilt, repression, and denial. These puzzles encourage players to think beyond mere mechanics, pushing them to reflect on the game's underlying narrative and symbolism. Silent Hill 2's approach to survival elements is subtle yet effective. The game balances horror with light survival mechanics, creating a delicate tension between resource management and psychological dread. Health management plays a crucial role in maintaining the player's vulnerability. Players must be mindful of their health and scarcity of resources, which forces them to avoid unnecessary combat or conserve health items for critical moments. The limited supply of health items adds a layer of tension to the exploration, making each encounter with enemies potentially life-threatening. Similarly, ammunition for firearms is limited, further encouraging players to avoid combat wherever possible. While weapons like the handgun and shotgun provide a sense of security, their effectiveness is curtailed by limited ammo reserves. The scarcity forces players to weigh the risks and rewards of engaging in combat, pushing them to rely on evasion and exploration rather than brute force. The game's weapon management system reinforces the idea that Silent Hill 2 is not a power fantasy but a psychological exploration of and fear. The balance between horror and survival elements is a defining aspect of Silent Hill 2. By restricting the player's resources, the game builds tension, ensuring that every encounter with an enemy is fraught with uncertainty. This scarcity, combined with the oppressive atmosphere, ensures that the player never feels entirely safe, even in seemingly calm moments. The pacing in Silent Hill 2 is meticulously crafted to create an overwhelming sense of dread. Unlike many horror games that rely on constant jump scares or rapid action sequences, Silent Hill 2 adopts a slower, more deliberate pace. The game's pacing mirrors James's emotional journey, oscillating between periods of eerie calm and bursts of intense horror. The game uses silence as a tool to create tension. There are long stretches where nothing happens, with only the ambient sounds of distant footsteps, wind, or unsettling hums to accompany the player. This absence of action lulls the player into a false sense of security, making the moments of horror that follow feel all the more impactful. By drawing out these quiet, uneventful sections, the game cultivates a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Players are always waiting for something to happen, which keeps them on edge throughout the entire experience. One of the defining features of Silent Hill 2's combat system is James Sunderland's limited combat prowess. Unlike many protagonists in survival horror games who are skilled in combat or gradually become more powerful, James remains a vulnerable, ordinary man throughout the game. This decision to keep James's combat abilities limited has profound implications for both gameplay and narrative. James handles weapons awkwardly, particularly in melee combat. His attacks are slow and imprecise, making every basic enemy encounter feel tense and uncertain. This lack of combat finesse is not a flaw in the game design, but a deliberate choice to reflect James's vulnerability. He's not a soldier or a hero. He is an emotionally broken man struggling to survive in a nightmarish world. The clumsiness of the combat reinforces the idea that James is not supposed to feel empowered by violence, but rather overwhelmed by it. Puzzles play a crucial role in Silent Hill 2, acting as both gameplay challenges and symbolic representation of James's psychological state. Unlike traditional puzzles in other games that are designed purely to test the player's problem-solving skills, the puzzles in Silent Hill 2 are deeply integrated into the narrative and often reflect the themes of guilt, memory, and repression. Many of the puzzles in the game are tied to disturbing imagery and cryptic poems that forces players to confront James's inner turmoil. For example, the puzzle involving the coins in the apartment complex requires players to place coins representing various figures, for example, a prisoner, an old man, and a snake, into specific slots symbolizing James's struggle with his own identity and moral conflict. Puzzles are also used to advance the narrative, with each puzzle solved bringing James closer to the truth about Mary's death. The hospital puzzle that requires James to unlock the box containing Mary's hair serves as a metaphor for his gradual unlocking of repressed memories. These puzzles are not just obstacles, they are integral to James's psychological journey, encouraging players to engage with the story on a deeper level. One of the most compelling aspects of Silent Hill 2 is the way it handles player agency and choices. Throughout the game, players make subtle choices, some deliberate, others subconscious, that shape the outcome of James's journey. These choices are not presented in the form of explicit dialogue options or morality meters. Instead, they are woven into the fabric of the gameplay. Many of the game's choices are tied to seemingly mundane actions, such as how often the player examines a certain object, for example, Mary's letter, or how they interact with each other, for example, showing sympathy for Angela or dismissing her. These small decisions accumulate over the course of the game, influencing the ending that the player receives. This approach to player agency mirrors the game's theme of moral ambiguity and psychological complexity, forcing players to reflect on their own choices and how they align with James's journey.
When Silent Hill 2 was developed for the PlayStation 2, the team faced a significant technical limitation. The PS2 hardware struggled to render large, detailed environments at extended draw distances. To overcome this, Team Silent introduced a dense layer of fog that covered much of the town, allowing them to master short rendering distances while keeping the world immersive. What began as a workaround for hardware limitations quickly evolved into one of the game's most defining and atmospheric features. The fog in Silent Hill 2 is not merely a technical element but a fundamental part of the game's atmosphere. It creates a profound sense of disorientation, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. As players navigate through Silent Hill, they are constantly shrouded in mist, unable to see more than a few feet in front of them. This visual limitation enhances the game's sense of isolation, making the player feel as if they are trapped in an endless, desolate purgatory. The fog's claustrophobic nature contributes to the psychological horror of the game. Players are forced to rely on sound and sudden visual cues rather than sight alone, leading to a constant state of tension. The fog's obscuring effect enhances the player's anxiety, as enemies or crucial plot elements can emerge unexpectedly from the mist, mirroring James' confusion and inability to see his own guilt clearly. The fog ultimately serves as a dual purpose. It is both a technical necessity and a core feature of the game's artistic vision, contributing to Silent Hill 2's haunting, unsettling mood. It symbolizes the emotional and psychological fog that James must navigate throughout the game, reinforcing themes of denial, uncertainty, and introspection. Silent Hill 2 is renowned for its ability to externalize internal conflict, using its visual design to reflect psychological horror rather than relying solely on traditional shock or gore. The game's environments, character design, and lighting are imbued with a sense of foreboding, with every visual element contributing to the overall feeling of dread and despair. The lighting in Silent Hill 2 is used to great effect, casting long shadows and creating pockets of darkness that hide threats both literal and metaphorical. Dimly lit hallways, flickering lights, and shadow-filled rooms create a sense of unease, where danger could lurk around any corner. The strategic use of lighting mirrors James's emotional journey. His path to confronting the truth is often shrouded in darkness, reflecting his psychological repression and the hidden aspects of his guilt. Perhaps one of the most striking visual aspects of Silent Hill 2 is the transition between fog-shrouded normal world and the nightmarish otherworld. The otherworld represents a deeper descent into psychological horror, where reality becomes warped and distorted. Rusted metal, fleshy walls, and blood-stained environments characterize this alternate reality, reflecting the inner torment of the characters. Each shift into the otherworld is an externalization of the subconscious, where the worst fears and traumas are brought to life. This visual design reinforces the game's core theme. The characters' psychological states manifest as tangible horrors. By using its environments and visual design to reflect the characters' mental states, Silent Hill 2 creates a world that feels not just dangerous but deeply personal. Character and monster design in Silent Hill 2 is central to the game's exploration of psychological horror. Each abnormal creature James encounters is more than just a threat. They are manifestations of his own repressed emotions, fears, and guilt. The design of these monsters is both horrifying and symbolic, serving as visual representations of James' internal struggle. The monsters in Silent Hill 2 are deliberately grotesque, their forms twisted and natural. Many of them resemble humanoid figures but are deformed or bound in ways that evoke a sense of pain and suffering. For example, the lying figures are humanoid but wrapped in a straitjacket-like skin. Their movements erratic and confined, symbolizing James's own emotional repression and feelings of helplessness. The design of each monster is tied to James's emotional journey. Pyramid Head, for instance, represents James's guilt and desire for punishment, while the nurses with their exaggerated feminine forms symbolize his repressed sexual desires and feelings of inadequacy in caring for Mary. Other enemies, such as the Flesh Lips and Abstract Daddy, a monstrous figure representing sexual abuse, directly relate to the personal traumas of the characters James encounters, such as Angela's history of abuse. Akira Yamaoka's work on the Silent Hill series is nothing short of iconic, and his contribution to Silent Hill 2 in particular is one of the most crucial aspects of the game's atmosphere. Yamaoka composed the game's soundtrack, but he also played a significant role in designing its soundscapes, helping to create an emotional tone that is equal parts haunting and melancholic. One of the key aspects of Yamaoka's score is its minimalism. Rather than overwhelming the player with constant music, much of the game is accompanied by silence or ambient noise, which serves to heighten the tension. When music does play, it often takes on subdued, haunting quality, with simple piano melodies or dissonant industrial sounds setting the tone. This minimalist approach allows the player to focus on the unsettling atmosphere of the town while leaving space for their own imagination to fill in the emotional gaps. Yamaoka's music is deeply emotional, with tracks like the theme of Laura, The music is not just background noise, it plays an active role in shaping the player's emotional experience, reinforcing the game's narrative and psychological depth. Silent Hill 2 masterfully balances diegetic and non-diegetic sound to manipulate the player's emotions and create a sense of immersion. Diegetic sound refers to sound that originates from the world of the game, for example the creaking of doors, footsteps and ambient noise, while non-diegetic sound includes elements like the soundtrack or sound effects that exist outside of the game's reality. The diegetic sound design in Silent Hill 2 is critical to its atmosphere. The town of Silent Hill is filled with subtle auditory cues, footsteps that echo down empty hallways, the distant sounds of creatures shuffling through the fog, and the hum of malfunctioning electronics. These sounds help to create a sense of place, making the player feel as if they are truly wandering through a haunted, decaying town. The diegetic sounds are often unnerving unnerving, even when nothing overly threatening is happening, contributing to the game's constant sense of dread. Yamaoka's soundtrack, which exists outside the game world, is used sparingly to heighten key emotional moments. For example, during James's encounters with Pyramid Head, the music shifts to an intense industrial noise, signaling the overwhelming danger and psychological conflict these encounters represent. In quieter moments, non-diegetic music may be entirely absent, allowing the player to focus on the diegetic sounds of the town. Several tracks from Silent Hill 2's soundtrack are particularly notable for their thematic relevance and emotional impact. Yamaoka's compositions not only set the mood, but also reflect the game's central themes of guilt, loss, and trauma. Speaking of notable soundtracks, let's talk about Promise Reprise. This track plays during the game's ending sequences, and its haunting melody captures the tragic nature of James's story. The soft piano notes evoke a sense of finality and reflection, signaling James's acceptance of the truth about Mary's death. The track's simplicity and beauty contrast with the darkness of the story, creating a poignant, emotional moment for players. Silent Hill 2 employs innovative camera work to heighten the psychological horror and induce discomfort in the player. The game uses a combination of fixed and dynamic camera angles, with each choice contributing to the overall sense of unease. In many sections of the game, the camera is fixed at odd angles, which not only limits the player's visibility but also creates a sense of claustrophobia. For example, when navigating tight hallways or entering small rooms, the camera may be positioned in such a way the player can't see what's ahead, forcing them to move forward blindly. This uncertainty mirrors James's psychological journey, as he is forced to confront hidden truths he would rather avoid. The fixed camera angles also prevent the player from feeling fully in control, heightening the sense of vulnerability. In other sections, the camera follows James closely, creating a more intimate yet uncomfortable perspective. These dynamic camera movements often switch unexpectedly, disorienting the player and making the world of Silent Hill feel even more unpredictable. The game frequently uses low-angle shots, extreme close-up, or skewed framing to unsettle the player. During key moments of tension, the camera may zoom in on James's face, emphasizing his emotional turmoil and making the player feel trapped alongside him. Developed for the PlayStation 2, Silent Hill 2 faced significant technical limitations, particularly in terms of rendering detailed environments and complex character models. However, the developers at Team Silent used these limitations to their advantage, crafting a unique aesthetic that not only masked their hardware's weaknesses, but also enhanced the game's atmosphere. As previously mentioned, the PS2's limited processing power meant that it couldn't render large environments in full detail at long distances. To address this, the team implemented the now iconic fog that shrouds the town of Silent Hill. This fog not only helped reduce the strain on the hardware, but also contributed to the game's eerie, disorienting atmosphere. The fog became a defining feature of the game's visual identity, adding to the player's sense of isolation and confusion. The PS2 was not capable of real-time dynamic lighting to the extent that modern hardware is, but the developers used pre-rendered lighting effects to create the game's distinctive mood. The careful use of lighting helped create the illusion of a more graphically advanced game, even within the constraints of the PS2. Despite the limitations of the PS2 hardware, Silent Hill 2 pushed the boundaries of what was technologically possible in several several ways, particularly in terms of environmental design, sound and storytelling. One of the ways Silent Hill 2 stood out was through its use of texture mapping and environmental effects. The game's environments are highly detailed, with surfaces covered in rust, grime and decay. The team used advanced texturing techniques to create the illusion of depth and texture in environments, adding to the game's oppressive atmosphere. This level of detail was unusual for games of the time and helped set Silent Hill 2 apart from the other horror titles. One of the most compelling aspects of Silent Hill 2 is its multiple endings, each offering a distinct resolution to James Sunderland's psychological journey. The game features 4 primary endings: In Water, Leave, Maria, and Rebirth, each of which provides a different interpretation of James's fate and his emotional states by the end of the game. What makes Silent Hill 2's endings unique is how they are influenced by subtle, often unconscious player actions rather than explicit moral choices, ensuring that each playthrough can result in a different conclusion based on how the player engages with the world and James's mental state. Let's speak about In Water. This is perhaps the darkest of the standard endings, in which James chooses to commit suicide by driving his car into Toluca Lake, symbolizing joining his wife in death. The ending is triggered if the player exhibits behavior that suggests James is consumed by his guilt and depression, such as examining the letter from Mary repeatedly or lingering near disturbing items like the knife Angela gives him. In this ending, James succumbs to his sorrow and guilt, unable to find redemption. Moving on to Leave. This ending is often seen as the most hopeful ending. Leave suggests that James has come to terms with his guilt over Mary's death and is ready to move on with his life. In this conclusion, James leaves Silent Hill with Laura, Mary's young friend, who symbolizes innocence and hope. This ending is reached by playing the game in a way that reflects James's desire to move forward, such as healing frequently, avoiding dangerous situations, and interacting with Laura in a compassionate manner. It implies that James has accepted responsibility for his actions but is prepared to seek redemption. The Maria ending is perhaps the most unsettling, as it suggests that James has chosen to remain in denial. In this ending, James leaves Silent Hill with Maria, who is a doppelganger of his deceased wife, Mary. However, as they exit, Maria begins coughing, implying that the cycle of illness and suffering may repeat itself. This ending occurs if the player spends a lot of time with Maria during the game, checking on her and treating her kindly, signaling that James has latched onto the fantasy she represents rather than confronting the reality of Mary's death. The Rebirth ending is unlocked on subsequent playthroughs, and it presents a more supernatural interpretation of James's journey. In this ending, James gathers items scattered throughout the game world that hint at occult rituals, ultimately implying that he intends to resurrect Mary. This ending adds a new layer of ambiguity to James's motivations, as it suggests that he is not seeking closure but rather a way to undo his mistakes through unnatural means. These multiple endings are not just narrative branches, they are reflections of how the player has guided James through his psychological journey. Each ending offers a distinct lens through which to view the character's mental states and actions, making the final outcome feel deeply personal and subjective to the player's experience. The thematic significance of Silent Hill 2's endings lies in how they reflect James's psychological state and how they alter the player's understanding of the story. Each ending embodies different aspects of guilt, redemption, denial, and self-destruction, giving the player insight into James's motivations and emotions. Silent Hill 2 is a timeless masterpiece that stands at the intersection of horror, emotional depth, and psychological exploration. Over the course of this deep dive, we have delved into various aspects of the game that contribute to its legacy, from its innovative storytelling and complex themes to its groundbreaking influence on the survival horror genre. We explored how Silent Hill 2 uses its multiple endings to craft a deeply personal narrative. Each ending, whether it's the tragic In Water, the redemptive Leave, the disturbing Maria, or the occult-driven Rebirth, reveals a different facet of James Sunderland's guilt, trauma, and search for redemption. The thematic weight of these endings adds layers to the understanding of the player's psyche and the game's overall narrative, encouraging introspection long after the credits roll. The ambiguity of the story and endings is one of the game's greatest strengths. By leaving many elements open to interpretation, Silent Hill 2 invites players to project their own thoughts, fears, and feelings onto the characters and story.
We've discovered that Silent Hill 2 is a game that transcends its genre, becoming more than just a survival horror title. It is a deeply moving exploration of human emotion, mental anguish, and the complexities of guilt and redemption. Its influence on both the gaming industry and wider culture is undeniable, and its psychological horror remains unmatched. Whether you're revisiting the fog-drenched streets of Silent Hill in the original, or waiting for the remake, which should have come out by the time this video is out. One thing is for certain, Silent Hill 2 is a game that will continue to haunt players for years to come, challenging them to confront their deepest fears and reflect on the darker aspects of the human condition. It's not just a game, it's an experience that leaves an undeniable mark on the player's soul. Without further ado, it's been JustMasked,
It's been Ams.
and we'll see you in the world of gaming.